like I said, one of the ones that I feel like an old guy now because I only just found out there's like this huge health contingency on X or Twitter, and you're like one of really prominent voices over there and popularizing with anabology this kind of fruit till noon, which is part of your shred maxing protocol, sometimes referred to as the honey diet, I believe. This was just a really interesting thing for me to follow and watch people doing it. The basic premise is just that, right? You eat a lot of fruit until noon, and it helps you get really shredded. I know you've got that pinned post where there's kind of the contrast between who you were like intermittent fasting, doing kind of a low carb approach, and you sitting there like jacked out of your goddamn mind doing this fruit till noon thing. So that's been a really interesting thing to watch. I'm curious, just like what are some of the mechanisms behind that? And I think as well, if I'm not mistaken, you're kind of a recovering fearer of carbohydrates like I was. I thought like basically carnivore was king, and then adding back sugars is a little traumatic at first when you think sugar makes you fat, and now to think about eating thousands of calories of fruit and fruit juice is a little wild. But again, proof is in the pudding. It seems to work. Like, what's going on with fruit till noon?
Yeah, so many of us, a lot of people think that these are ideological pushes, but no, they're just results of experiences. And I was memed into the low carb fad for a really long time, right? Because I had ADHD and it did help my brain, right? And it helped me, like become a little bit less bloated in the beginning. But you get to a certain point where you realize it's a trap, right? Because yeah, low carb works for a while until it doesn't, right? Until your cortisol catches up to you, until you're not getting the adequate amounts of recovery. So it's like, oh, this is so great. Intermittent fasting makes me shredded, it makes me focus better, but not realizing that that's driven by catabolic biological functions
Yeah.
where your body's literally eating itself away. So you get to a certain point where it starts to wear off. You start gaining fat again in weird places. Your hormones tank, your libido like plummets. All of these things that you initially did for the purpose of getting rid of these things come back tenfold. But
Mm,
you're so memed into this low carb movement, into these cults, right? The carnivore cult, the keto cult. It's part of your identity. If you stop being keto, you're no longer going to get invited to KetoCon. You're going to lose all of
yeah.
your friends. Maybe you started a keto business, right?
Yep.
So now you're
Yep.
stuck in it. Most people don't have I don't know what it would be like, the foresight really to say, okay, maybe it's time to experiment with something new. And I still like I did that shred maxing protocol, but I always said, I'm like, listen, this is a protocol for getting a specific result. It's not a way of life. It's a
Yeah.
protocol that you can implement based on these fundamental presuppositions that I do think are legitimate and valid. Now, when it comes to the actual protocol, right? You mentioned anabology and the honey diet. Anabology, we actually just had him on the podcast. He had the honey diet for this idea of like experimental fat loss. And that diet it operates on some similar principles, but it's effectively different in its application and its use case. So for the shred maxing protocol that I put together was something that I experimented with, for about 6 months. This from last end of winter to the fall. And I really just went about to say, like, okay, I noticed when I was in Mexico, not intentionally doing this, that I felt really good when I would just wake up and I didn't really feel like eating food. I would just have like the world's largest smoothie with a coffee.
Yeah.
And that's something that I never did. I would never just like redline carbohydrates because I'm like, well, that's going to have, a poor insulin spike. It's going to make my blood sugar too high. It's going to cause insulin resistance, whatnot, all this stuff I was talking about. I did that because I didn't really care. But then I started realizing, I'm like, whoa, colors are brighter. I have better mood and energy and focus. I need to
Mm,
work out. It's not just that I want to work out. I need to work out. I need to move physically. And it was really fascinating. That was about the same time that anabology was talking about his honey diet. There's another guy named Thermobolic who was talking about his experience with becoming an absolute unit, just redlining carbohydrates. So then I started structuring it a little bit more and I started just operating with it and experimenting with it. And I started building out like this concept and this playbook with new information that I was getting that, wow, okay, so for so long, I've been told that carbohydrates are the enemy, when in reality, it's not as much about carbohydrates, it's about mixing energy substrates and making your metabolism less efficient, right?
mm,
When you're restricting carbohydrates, you're signaling scarcity to your body. You're saying, hey, listen, we only have this much energy substrate that we're getting in every day. So we don't want to utilize too much to metabolically taxing operations like maintaining muscle or having copious amounts of energy. We're actually going to want to conserve more for a rainy day by storing it as fat, right?
yeah.
But what if we removed that signaling entirely and we signaled abundance by saying, hey, listen, biology, we have an infinite amount of clean carbohydrates. We're going to make it as efficient as possible for you, right? We're going to make it so efficient where you can allocate all of these towards burning as energy, right? Because your brain uses a load of glucose just for thinking and energy and mood and cognitive processes. You can utilize as much as you want for storing glycogen in your muscles and in your liver and for actually burning those, right? But not only are we going to signal all of that, we're going to remind you that it's actually essential that you use them for these purposes by using this newfound energy to apply it to having more physical activity, right? To
Yeah.
moving around more, to doing more vibrant things, to thinking harder, to pursuing more, right? So the issue that a lot of people have is they signal abundance by eating a bunch of shit food or by doing a bunch of shit stuff, but they don't signal the abundance requirement and the abundance utilization component of it. So it's not just about the diet, it's about the lifestyle as well. It just so
Right.
happens that by signaling abundance, you have all this energy, you need to utilize that energy. Now, when it comes to the actual breakdown of it, you eat fruit till noon, right? You use certain supplements and components that are natural for the most part that help your body like shuttle those nutrients to the right places, right? To make sure that those nutrients are going to the right places, to make sure that your mitochondria are fully functional and optimal so they can properly utilize all of that energy substrate without like increasing the amount of negative metabolic byproducts that occur by burning energy, right? When you burn
Mm.
fuel, you create fumes, right? So we want to make sure that it's super efficient. We're not losing fuel. We're not leaking fuel that's falling to the bed of our engine bed, or we're not, creating too many reactive oxygen species via the burning of carbohydrates in our mitochondria. And you incorporate all of that with like a very relatively strict fat hierarchy, right? There's certain fats that your body's going to like selectively store because they don't want to break them down, like polyunsaturated fatty acids, because it creates too many reactive oxygen species. By increasing your metabolic rate even higher by incorporating certain supplements or certain foods, and then doing that as a whole to the point where your metabolism is so effective that you can then tone down. You don't have to do that protocol every day. You can have those meals where you're combining carbs and fats and not have a problem. And
Yeah.
I did that. And the second phase of that was like, okay, cool. What if I stopped doing that and I went towards just like eating a bunch of food to see how much mass I can gain and do all that? And the results are incredible. So it's not just about the shredding, it's about a complete reset and resetting your metabolic genetics to
Mm.
make you essentially a different biological phenom. It really just completely changes your body composition even after you're done with the protocol.
All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.